Welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast, where we empower you to build a better ranch and transform your operations into a thriving business. I'm your host, John Haskell. Let's get started. Welcome to the Ranchonomics podcast. Today, we're going to do a solo episode. I want to talk about a topic that's pretty important, and it's about the amount of time that you have left. Most of us, I think, overestimate the amount of time we have left, and I think we want to play a little exercise, play a little game that illustrates to us exactly how much time we do not have left. This podcast today is based on a presentation that I did while we were down in Alabama at our recent conference. After getting like a foot of heavy wet snow yesterday in Wyoming, it's a little hard to believe that 2 weeks ago or so we were down at the beach on the Gulf Coast where it wasn't exactly hot, but it was darn sure not snowing. So we had a wonderful meeting there, had a couple of really good presenters, had lots of great people come and attend. So lots of discussion, lots of good networking. Highly recommend our annual retreat. It is a lot of fun. Orange Beach, Alabama, where we hosted along the Gulf Coast, is a beautiful place. Lots of good food. The facilities we had were good. It was a neat opportunity to get away and really think about our businesses from a very different perspective. And sometimes a different location helps provide a different perspective. So a lot of fun. Anyway, in that, the wrap-up talk from that day is part of what I'm going to give today. I just want to review some of the same concepts. And I want to start when we talk about time by how lucky I have been in my career to meet good, wonderful people, like Bud Williams, like Wally Olson, like Walter Lynn, Bob Metzger, who have done a wonderful job of being very kind to me, taking me under their wing, teaching me what they know, and helping me to advance my career. That has been augmented certainly by classes, things like RMC, or Ranching for Profit, things like Bud Williams Marketing, but personal interactions, of course, and the friends and kind of associates I've made through those classes and professional development opportunities have been truly wonderful and have blessed my life for decades. We've talked here about the value of education, and I cannot emphasize that enough, that over time, if you pay what may seem an extraordinary amount for a single class, $4,000 or $5,000 even. And if I use RFP, Ranching for Profit, as the example, I took that class in the early 2000s and then see how it has benefited me in the intervening decades since then. I think I've gotten my original money back. So anyway, the other thing that we have talked a lot about on our webinars, and I have been talking about publicly, is the importance of thinking long-term and thinking about compounding growth. When we have a bad situation, we have compounding. Of course, that can take us down faster than we might otherwise go. But for most of us that build positive businesses, that build profitable businesses that are going in a direction that we want them to go, one of the hardest things is to remember to be patient and to let that compound growth take effect, if you will, or sort of exercise its full effects. When we look at a compound growth curve, the first thing that we see is a long, flat tail, followed by a sharp rise. And what we need to remember during that long, flat tail, whether we're talking about, yeast culture growing in a petri dish like we did it in science class in 5th grade, or we're talking about the growth of our money, the growth of our business, that sort of thing. That long, flat tail, if we are doing the right things, does not look like much, but is generating a lot of momentum that will be very useful in the future. So that concept of compound growth, I think, is very, very important as we look across the span of a career, let's say. So when we look at the performance of a business over a 20-year period or a 30-year period, what we often see is that the end point of that business is very different than what you would have predicted based on the starting point or even the trajectory based on the first 3 to 5 years. There is a lot of endurance and patience that is required in the first 3 to 5 years of running a business. And if you are running a new business, we have all been there. I do not doubt that you are experiencing some frustration and fatigue. If we have indicators in our business that show that we are going the right direction, then my advice for you is to press on, because you could do nothing better than continue working even though it doesn't appear like you're producing much. If you're working in a bad business, however, it'd be best to stop that as quickly as possible and get things right. And I think one of the things that people miss is sometimes we sort of apply effort in the wrong areas. I want you to apply effort to the places that are going well, and I want you to not apply effort in the areas that aren't going well. Let's talk a little about the opposite side of that. So when we think about compound growth, I'm often encouraging people to be patient. And I'm going to say somewhat impatiently patient, right? You want to make sure the metrics are right. But if they are, then you need to sort of let it work. There's another part of our life that I think we need to be somewhat impatient with. And that is that each of us has a fairly short amount of time here on this earth. We can buy other people's time, for example, to do tasks and that sort of thing, but we cannot buy a single minute of our own time. And here's a fun exercise for you. If you live in the US, and it's very similar in Canada, but it is slightly different. But if you live in the US, you can go to the Social Security Administration and look up their actuarial life table. There are a couple of ways to think about life expectancy. The first is just the average. And so generally in the US for males, life expectancy is believed to be about 77 years and females about 81 years. There's a range of estimates there. Some say that males is 74.8. Some say that it's 77.5. We're going to use 77 and 81 for male and female. And the simplest thing I want you to do is take your age and subtract it from 77. So I am 53. So if I subtract 53, and I just had a birthday a few weeks ago while we were down in Alabama, fortunately. So if I subtract 53 from 77, I get 24. And the fun part of this exercise that my wife hates is you take that 24 and multiply it by 365. And what's fascinating for me, that is 8,760 days. And what jumped out at me the first time I did this actually after my 52nd birthday the first time. What jumped out at me is that is not 10,000. If you are 30 years old, you have a number of days that's significantly larger and is bigger than 10,000 as an example. But in my case, this is a 4-digit number. Now, I could get run over by a bus tomorrow. And so, this could be 0. But if I live to be the average, right, then that could be as many as, we'll just call it 9,000 days, which doesn't sound like that many when you really think about it. Now, my family's relatively long-lived. I am a fairly healthy individual, but we'll talk about that in a second. So I would naturally expect to live to be more than 77 years old. But I'm going to tell you that I actually spent the weekend in the ICU with what the doctors funnily call a health accident, which is a weird way of saying things went wrong. I don't have high blood pressure. I don't have problems with cholesterol. I did not get a COVID shot. I am a generally healthy person. I get the normal cold and flu kind of thing, but don't take any prescription drugs. I exercise regularly, not terribly overweight. I have a bit of a spare tire, but nothing terribly embarrassing. I've got 3 young kids. I've got a wonderful wife. We've got a loving family. I don't have a family history of any kind of health problem, but there I sat in the ICU for 2 days. So things happen unexpectedly. And one of the things that I think a lot about is 2 things. What am I doing with the time I have left? And am I prepared, as we talked about with Abby a few weeks ago, am I prepared if something bad happens? Now, we always hear this deal about, people on their deathbed that don't wish they spent more time at work, that sort of thing. I totally get that. But I take a little different take on that because if I am on my deathbed, I certainly am going to we're all going to wish that we spent more time with our kids and our loved ones and that sort of thing. Don't doubt that. But I also am going to have some great regrets if I am on my deathbed and I have not left my family financially able to care for themselves after I am gone. I am a father of 3 young kids. Our wife stays home. My job in our family is to be the primary financial provider. If I have not done my job by the time I pass from this earth, I will be very disappointed in myself. So while, yes, we can talk about sort of the romantic notions of how we wish we spent more time sort of smelling the flowers and doing that sort of thing, a very practical part of me says, if I leave Brit alert, Brit's my wife, I've created a real problem. If I have created a situation where my family cannot continue to support themselves, until they are able to care for themselves on their own, I have not done my job as a father and as a husband. I take that responsibility pretty seriously. And so that's one of the reasons why we do a number of the things we do in our company. Ranchite, as many of you know, is a relatively new company. We're not where we need to be in terms of if I die, everything's going to function perfectly tomorrow, but we are working our way towards getting there. And we want to make sure that, 2 parts. One is our family part. The other is the company part, that both of those things can continue relatively uninterrupted, even if I'm not here. At Ranchite LLC, we believe your ranch deserves more than just survival mode. You deserve to thrive. Our experienced accountants and business coaches will help you get control over your financials so you can focus on what you do best, running the ranch. We offer a comprehensive process that includes bookkeeping, consulting, and even training tailored to your needs. Don't let your financials slow you down. Visit ranchritellc.com to schedule your free consultation and let Ranchite take care of the numbers so you can take care of the rest of it. So one of the things that comes up when we think about the amount of time we have and the idea of long-term compounding is how are we using the time we have? And there's a wonderful book by a guy named Sutherland that is The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time. It's a book about Scrum. There are two Sutherlands that have written it. I believe it's a father-son team. It's a great book. Available on Amazon. It's cheap. He spends a lot of time in that book talking about the productivity of using our time and how productive we are with the time we have. He talks about two major things. The first one is a general topic that I think most of us understand, which is the fact that when we are not focused, we are not very effective and we are not good. Not only are we not good at what we're doing, we don't get very much done in a certain period of time. They cite a number of studies and have a wonderful graphic in that book whereby they create a situation, and this is all taken out of, I believe the research comes from the world of software about building, but they basically take a series of tasks and they give software engineers tasks that are either broken up, like in, multiple different tasks on different projects, or it's multiple tasks from one project front to end. And what they find is if they have a software engineer developing 3 different products and they do a third on one product, a third on one product, a third on one product, and then go back to the first one, is that the projects they were working on took basically 9 months to complete. And when they instead blocked those so that they worked on project 1 from start to completion, project 2 from start to completion, and project 3 from start to completion, instead of interleaving them or switching back and forth, they basically cut the total time it took to get all 3 of those projects done by a third. So in the first case, I think I said 9 months, it might be 8, but in the first case, it took from January to August to do the same amount of work. And in the second case, where they blocked everything up and basically worked uninterrupted on one project at a time, they started in January and got done by the middle of May. So what does that mean? That means that we often have the ability to get more done with the time that we have. When I look at people like Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk, and I actually worked for a man years ago who was incredibly productive with his time. And the thing that's fascinating to me about that is it seems like it's sort of a force of will thing that they're able to just get more done than the average person. Or, lots of us would like to say, they can get by with less sleep than I need, et cetera. But really, the power of focus is what they leverage. They really get on a project and stay on it until it's complete. There's another piece that I've had to learn over the years, and I have to sort of relearn this one multiple times that they cite in this book. And it's one that we in agriculture are particularly bad at. But it's basically this idea that taking time off can increase our productivity. I spent some time in college. I wrote software to put myself through college. And I wrote like statistical programs in a mainframe type computer. And one of the things I would find is that on Friday, I would often get stuck on a problem, right? And in writing these programs, this was in the old days where everything was, text interface. It was like a black screen with a green cursor kind of thing. And you'd have to type everything in. And the commands always had to be exactly right. Otherwise, the model wouldn't run. And so what would happen is I would get in a situation where there'd be a bug in my program. And Friday afternoon, I couldn't figure it out. I'd work on it. I couldn't figure it out. I'd go home. I'd come back Saturday, could not figure it out. And I'd work on it and I'd work on it. And because I had a great work ethic instilled by my parents, which I am wonderfully grateful for, because I didn't get worked out on Saturday, I would come back on Sunday and work on it and work on it and work on it. And I started dating a gal who kind of got me back into going back to church for a while, which was really nice. And I would start taking Sundays off. And what happened was that problem that I couldn't get figured out, like half the day on Friday and all day Saturday, I would take Sunday off, and Monday morning, I would solve that problem in less than 20 minutes. It was always the most obvious thing that would just jump out at you when you would look at it on Sunday morning. So what did I learn from that? Well, I could stay all day and work on Sunday, but it likely wasn't that productive. And if I had a good night's sleep and a day away from looking at this black screen with the green flashing cursor, when I came back on Monday, the problem was much more apparent. What Sutherland and all present in the graph is that most workers actually can increase output by decreasing hours. And obviously, there's a limit to this. Obviously, there are times when decreasing hours is not possible, but there are lots of other times where it is. And what they show is that there is a point where as you work more and more hours, you just become less and less productive. And I know we'd all like to deny that that happens, but the evidence is absolutely overwhelming that we aren't superhuman. Most of us, right? We need a reasonable amount of sleep. We actually perform better when we have rest. The same thing is true in exercise. You can overtrain yourself to the point where you make yourself weaker by overtraining. It is the rest period when we train for strength, for example, that allows our body to build back and be better. Our brains need a certain amount of rest. Our bodies need a certain amount of rest. And it turns out over and over again, we are more productive when we rest. Now, can people take that too far? Absolutely. Do we live surrounded by people that are often, working way less than they could be? Absolutely. But most of us in agriculture don't suffer from that. Most of us in agriculture work way too much, and that too much really impacts our productivity. Now, it has other impacts too, because it impacts our family, it impacts our relationship, that sort of thing. I am not talking about that today, although we all know those are impacts. It literally makes you less productive at work. So if you are spending 7 days a week away from your family thinking that you are doing great things for all of you, you might be deluding yourself. And I would challenge you to look at that. The next thing I want you to really consider is, with all this work that we put in, really revisit this idea of what are you building and why? Why are we doing all this work? Often there are great reasons. And I talk to people that have fantastic missions and visions on a regular basis. They have a real purpose. They have a reason for what they are doing. They are working in a cause that they really believe in, that benefits them, that benefits their community, that benefits their family. We have to make sure we return to this, because it is so easy to get busy in the details of the work. We talk a lot about Whitby and Whatby, right? Working in the business versus working on the business. I want to take this just a little further, because this is almost more personal to me, where we think at regular intervals about why we are in the business, not just the things that we can do in the business to make it a better business. I absolutely want us to be doing that, but I also want us to be revisiting the purpose. And we often need to revisit that with our family, and we need to revisit that with our employees, because that why of why we are doing what we do is very important. For me personally, I want to talk just a little about the why, because one of the things that I have definitely seen in my life, and this is something we often think about, we think about our legacy. We think about a long-term legacy. We think about what are we going to leave behind to our children and our children's children. I have been involved in my family with two pretty significant family enterprises. One, a ranch in Southern California. I'm not going to say I was closely involved in these, but these are in my family, if you will. A significant ranch in Southern California that is no longer a ranch. It is a subdivision, and it was a beautiful place. I got to spend a bunch of time there when I was a kid. It just, because of all kinds of reasons, is no longer a ranch, but a big part of that having to do with family dynamics and finance and economics. And so that is a story that is kind of a sad one, and it is written on the land. The other is my father's family had a really cool company where they had actually invented the thing that scoops out wooden chairs. If you've ever sat in an old wooden chair or like a wooden rocking chair, it has that like funny like groove where your butt kind of sits right in. That was invented by my father's mother's family. And you can imagine that both of those things, that ranch in Southern California and this chair scooping factory thing, those were serious businesses that generated a lot of revenue. And what's interesting is that those businesses, just like so many others, basically have no impact 3 generations later. When we look at the average, if you take $100 million and you follow that down for 3 or 4 generations, and you take out taxes and you take out, some loss and that sort of thing, you wind up leaving to the children in the 4th generation about $350,000. And remember, you started with $100 million. That's a pretty significant loss. And I think lots of us are not in the position to leave 100 million. We're leaving significantly less than that. And are we really having such a small impact on 2 or 3 generations down the line? That's a bit of a terrifying prospect. And again, if we're spending a lot of our time working, what are we really building? And is it realistically going to have the type of multi-generational impact that we want to have? I think to just sort of revisit the beginning, when we look at the amount of time we have, we only have our time. We never know when that's going to go. I think it is imperative for us to think about what we really want to accomplish. I've told you a few of the things that I really want to accomplish before I pass, the financial security for my immediate family, for example. But I want all of you to really think about where you want that to be and make sure that the actions that you're taking on a daily, weekly, monthly basis are actually getting you there. We have to stop and get our head up out of the water and look around and make sure that the daily grind that we get in, and spring is coming, so it's about to hit, make sure that while we are in that daily grind, we're actually getting to where we want to be. This year is going to go by, whether you move yourself towards your long-term goals or not. And my question for you is, are you going to be on the path you want to be on, or are you going to put it off for another year? If you put it off for another year, you deduct another 365 days from your total. I think that for me, as I am in my 50s now, has become a pretty stout lesson. There's a real wake-up call to the fact that I am not eternal. None of us are. We are going to leave this earth and all of it behind. That and taxes are the guarantee, right? But we need to make sure that each day that we are living is getting us towards where we want to be. So I'll leave you with that today. Hope this finds you well, and I hope this gives you some good things to think about. And I look forward to seeing you next week on the Ranchonomics podcast. Thank you very much. Thank you for tuning into the Ranchonomics podcast. We hope this episode helped you win today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share it with a friend.